Hey, hey. All right, we're going to do some triads. Now let's just go over kind of the main concepts here. Make sure you got all this stuff under your belt. So first thing is just to have this one string C major scale. It's to get that on the top three strings. So the high E, the B, and the G string. Just to know where all your notes in C major are on those strings. It's really helpful for navigating the neck and figuring out where your triad should be. So practice that as a warm-up. And then we're dealing with this key of C major. And just to review what triads are, they're the main type of harmony that we use in Western music. They're 3-note chords. So we have a root, a third, and a fifth in each chord. Now you can base everything kind of on the major version of the major scale. So if you find your root note to your triad, so in this case C, and you figure out the notes in your major scale, which are you find starting on C and going whole step to D, whole step to E, whole step to F, and so on. And you pick the first note, skip one, pick the third note, skip one, pick the fifth note. Then you get your root, your third, and your fifth. And that's the kind of the structure of all these chords that we use. So what we've been doing is finding them just on these top three strings of the guitar. And we have major triads, all in the major key. We have major triads, we have minor triads, and we have diminished triads. And you can kind of think of those all as based on the major. So if you can find your major triad, and then you take the third of the chord, in this case it's E, and you flat it by one note, so to E flat, keep everything else the same, you get a minor triad. And if you go back to the major, if you flat the third to E flat, and then here's G, which is the fifth, and you flat the fifth to G flat, you get a diminished C, E flat, G flat. So major is C, E, G, minor C, E flat, G, and diminished would be C, E flat, and G flat. So those shapes are our main shapes. Now, in the key of C major, we don't have a C major chord, a C minor chord, and a C diminished chord, but we have those qualities of chords starting on different notes up the scale, which is sort of what we've been working on with the chord scales. So what you would do, you kind of have, I think you have pretty well memorized the pattern: major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then back to major. But if you didn't know that, the long way to find all these, firstly, all you're doing is going up the scale and playing notes that are separated by a third. So you're just skipping a note. So you're playing D, skipping E, playing F, skipping G, playing A. And those are your three notes that we have in C major. So those are the three notes you play. That just happens to form a D minor chord. if we wanted to figure out that that was a D minor chord from relating everything back to a major chord, we'd have to figure out what a D major chord was first, because that's our baseline. And in order to figure out a D major chord, we have to think outside the key of C and change everything to D major. So we'd start on D and go D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, so that we could find the notes that would be in a D major chord, the 1, the 3, and the 5 of the D major scale. And in that case, we get D, F sharp, and A. Now, if you go back to our original key of C major, we don't have an F sharp, we have an F. So we have a D, an F, and an A, which we know is taking that F sharp and flatting it. So we know that that's a minor chord. That's the long way around to think about it, but it gives you a baseline for every chord. So you can, just be sure and make sense at everything. So hopefully that makes sense. It's a little confusing at first with the switching of keys, because we're not switching keys here when we're just making these chords. It's just as a reference point. So you can say, well, I know a D major chord is D, F sharp, and A. So in the key of C, we have a D, an F, and an A. So what kind of chord is that? Well, I flatted the third in relationship to the major chord, so it makes it D minor. So that's the beginning of triads. So in the key of C, you get C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, back down here to A minor, B diminished, back to C major. So that's your first kind of chord scale to get. Now, we were talking also about inversions. And all inversions are is if we have 3 notes in our triad, so here we have C, E, and G, you can take those notes and flip them around into different orders, and they'll still sound like the same harmony, like the same chord. So say instead of putting C on the bottom, which is here on the 5th fret of the G string, we went up to the 9th fret on the G string and put an E on the bottom, which is the 3rd of the chord. And then we filled out the chord on the top 2 strings with a G and a C. So we have the same 3 notes, we're just playing an E in the bass rather than a C. That would be the first inversion. So when you put the 3rd of the chord in the bass, you get the first inversion. Now if we kept going to find G, which is the 5th of the chord, we put that in the bass, and then we find the other 2 notes, an E and a C. We have the 5th of the chord in the bass, but we're playing the same 3 notes. That's the second inversion. So we're playing the same 3 notes, all 3 inversions. We're just putting a different note in the bass. You're just flipping, if you picture it as being C, E, G, we're just flipping it around, or inverting, which is why they freaking call it that. So these are all root position chords. The root is your 1, or your the letter of the key that you're in. So the root of C major is C. We were having trouble with those 2 words, root and bass. So this has the root, which is C, in the bass. This has the 3rd, which is E, in the bass, which is your lowest note. So your root's always going to be C. So all of these are root position chords, which means that the letter name of the chord is in the bass. So C with C in the bass, D minor with D in the bass, E minor with E in the bass, and so forth. So we worked on that chord scale. Now the next one that we wanted to get was this first inversion C triad, which is up here on the barring the 8th fret and on the G string with the middle finger on the 9th fret. That's your major chord shape for this inversion. So every time you play a major chord in this inversion, it's going to look like that, just like every time you play a major chord in this inversion, it'll look like that. So if we wanted to switch this to a minor chord, we take the 3rd, which is here in the bass, and we'd flat it, so we could just bar everything. So that would be your minor shape. Major shape, minor shape. And then if we wanted to play the diminished shape, we'd find the 5th, which is a G, right there on the B string, and we'd flat that, so you get this kind of D7 sort of shape. And that gives you E flat, G flat, and C. That's your diminished shape. So what we want to do with this set of shapes is the same thing that we did here in the root position. We want to go C, and then our next chord would be D minor. So what's helpful to me, until you just know these instinctually, is finding where your root is. So in this case, your C is on top, which is the root. So we can track that first. So we say the next chord is going to be a D chord, a D minor. So we'd move the root up to D. We know our minor shape is the bar. So we get D, an F in the bass, and then an A. And then we'd want to move this to E on the 12th fret. We know it's E minor, so we can bar that. We're going to circle back around because we don't want to get too high on the neck. F is right here on the 1st fret of the E string. We want to make our major shape, which is middle finger on the 2nd fret of the G string. And that's F major with an A, or the 3rd, in the bass. Keep going. G on the top, that's the root. We want G major, so we make our major shape with a B right here on the middle finger in the bass. Then A, we want a minor, so we make our minor shape. B, and this is the diminished. So we remember our diminished shape like this, with middle finger here with the 3rd, which is a D in the bass. 1st finger back on the 6th fret on the B string, which is an F, which is the 5th. And our root is on top on the 7th fret, which is a B. So D, F, B. And then we're back to C. So essentially we're playing the same chords as we did down here in root position. C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A, B diminished, C major. We're just playing them with the notes flipped around. So this is C major with an E in the bass, D minor with an F in the bass, E minor with a G in the bass, F major with an A in the bass, G major with a B in the bass, A minor with a C in the bass, B diminished with a D in the bass, and then back to C major with an E in the bass. So we're still basically just going up the scale in a stack of thirds from E, F, G, to C. That interval is actually a fourth, but in relationship to E, you can think of it as a third. We'll get into that. I don't want to. That's a can of worms. We don't need to open that right now. So E, G, and C. So you just practice it. Get your shapes down. And you got your C, all the chords in the key of C in the first inversion. So let's stick with that. We talked about, combining the chords or the inversions. And we'll get into that more next lesson. But for now, just really focus on these two inversions and get into your fingers. Great. Hopefully that is pretty clear. If you ever need me to write it down, notate it for you to make it easier, just let me know. I might have these already. If I can find them written down, I'll pop them up on the website for you. Okay, I'll see you soon. Hope you're having a good weekend. Okay.